Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time we're tackling tipping points.
Oh, yeah, those moments when just a tiny thing, like a single tweet even.
Exactly, can set off a whole chain reaction and lead to massive changes.
Yeah, and to guide us, we have Malcolm Gladwell's Revenge of the Tipping Point.
This book is super interesting because Gladwell's going back to his earlier work.
Kind of revisiting, right, acknowledging that our understanding of these tipping points has evolved.
Absolutely. Things change, we learn more, and it's crucial to re-examine even established theories with a fresh perspective.
Couldn't agree more. So listeners, get ready. We're going to uncover some surprising insights into how these subtle forces can actually shape behaviors, trends, even whole societies.
And one of the most fascinating ideas Gladwell revisits is the power of place.
The idea that our environment, the actual places we're in, play a much bigger role than we might realize.
I was pretty skeptical when I first came across this, but then Gladwell brought up this example about bank robberies in Los Angeles.
Oh, yeah, what was that?
Well, LA was at one point the bank robbery capital of the world.
Wow.
And this was all thanks to a very specific style of robbery. It almost became like a trend started by these two guys, Casper and Sea Dog.
And New York City, even with notorious figures like Willie Sutton, never saw anything like that. It really makes you think.
It does, right.
Yeah.
What was it about Los Angeles, about the culture or the environment, that made it so prone to that particular type of crime?
It's like the place itself tipped the scales.
Exactly. And Gladwell doesn't stop there. He takes this power of place idea into healthcare as well.
Right. He talks about a doctor named Wenberg and his research on small area variation.
Basically, Wenberg found that doctors in different regions often treat the same medical conditions in wildly different ways.
Like imagine two patients, same heart condition, one living in Maine, the other in California. The Maine patient might get recommended for bypass surgery, while the California patient might receive medication and lifestyle changes.
There are different approaches.
And it suggests that there are these unspoken medical cultures in different areas that influence how doctors practice, not just pure medical science.
And this concept even extends to something like vaccination choices.
Gladwell talks about Waldorf schools.
Yeah.
They have a specific educational approach, and they consistently have lower vaccination rates compared to other schools in the same areas.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Like the school's culture, the community's shared beliefs, those things can have a huge impact on parents' decisions about vaccines, even potentially overriding their personal views.
And then Gladwell takes us to Miami, a city that he describes as a hotbed for Medicare fraud.
Yeah, this part was fascinating, wasn't it? Gladwell paints this picture of how the city's history, combined with a lot of people familiar with how to exploit the system, all led to this widespread culture of deception.
You have these office buildings like the Fontainebleau Park Office Plaza becoming fronts for elaborate schemes.
And even a former merchandise mart becoming a hub for fake medical offices.
The audacity, right? Absolutely. And then there's the case of Philip S. Formas, who was convicted in this huge Medicare fraud case.
And what was remarkable was that his lawyer argued Esformes lost himself after moving to Miami.
As if the city itself somehow influenced his actions.
It's a really intriguing thought.
Hmm.
Can a place actually be so powerful that it can lead us down a path we wouldn't have taken otherwise?
It's a question worth pondering. And there's so much more to uncover when it comes to tipping points.
Gladwell has a lot more to unpack, and we'll dive deeper after a quick break.
Stay tuned. So we've seen how a place can be a tipping point in itself.
Right, like a location can actually influence events.
Now let's look at how the makeup of groups can be a trigger for change. And this is where Gladwell brings up the magic third.
Oh, this one really got me thinking. Imagine you have a boardroom, 9 seats.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
If there's only one woman in that room, her voice might get lost.
Her perspective might be overlooked, for sure.
But if you have 3 women at that table, the dynamic changes completely.
Gladwell draws on Rosabeth Moss Kanter's research for this.
Oh yeah? What did she find?
Well, Kanter found that when women are a small minority in a group, they face some really specific challenges.
Like they can feel like they're just there as a token, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Their contributions can be overshadowed by their gender, their skills and abilities stereotyped.
It's like they're seen as representing all women, not as individuals with their own unique talents and perspectives.
And this lack of representation has real consequences. Look at corporate boards, for example. Studies have shown that boards with 3 or more women, things are just different.
Decisions are made differently.
Yeah, women's voices are heard more clearly, their ideas are taken more seriously,
Yeah.
and it leads to more balanced and inclusive outcomes.
It makes you wonder if this magic third idea could apply to other areas where there are imbalances.
Gladwell touches on that, actually. He brings up education.
Okay, how so?
Well, he cites research suggesting that Black students' math scores might actually improve in classrooms where they're not such a small minority.
Interesting.
It suggests that maybe reaching that magic third could create a more supportive and inclusive learning environment.
Gladwell also tells this story about a planned community in Palo Alto called the Lawrence Tract.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that one.
So the goal of this community was to create racial harmony, and they tried to do that by limiting the proportion of each racial group, white, Black, Asian, to 1/3 each.
While the intention might have been good to create a balanced community, you can see how it raises some tricky ethical questions.
It does, right.
Yeah.
It makes you think about the problems of trying to manipulate social dynamics, even when you're trying to do something positive.
For sure.
But shifting gears a bit, Gladwell also dives into the power of stories, those narratives that shape how we see the world.
The stories we tell ourselves as a society, how they influence what we believe, and even how we act.
Gladwell calls these dominant narratives overstories. He uses the example of how the Holocaust was initially downplayed or even ignored in American media.
Right, it wasn't really talked about.
But then, in 1978, there was this powerful TV miniseries called Holocaust.
And it brought the horrors of that event into millions of homes.
It wasn't just information, it was about creating an emotional connection.
A shared understanding that really challenged the prevailing narrative.
It's incredible how a single story can shift an entire nation's perception. And Gladwell has another example, how LGBTQ+ people were represented on television.
Right, for years and years, gay characters were portrayed as isolated, troubled individuals.
Reinforcing negative stereotypes.
Then you have a show like Will and Grace in the late 90s.
That was a game changer, wasn't it?
It was. It showed gay characters as well-adjusted, successful, with strong relationships.
A real shift in perspective.
And many believe that this actually helped change public opinion on LGBTQ+ issues.
It shows how storytelling can be a real force for social change.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've got places, groups, and stories all acting as tipping points. But get ready for this. Super spreaders.
The idea that certain individuals can have a much bigger impact on spreading something.
Think about the COVID-19 pandemic.
A prime example.
Research showed that just a small number of infected people were responsible for most of the transmission.
And certain events, like that Biogen conference in Boston, became super spreading events.
One gathering with a relatively small number of people led to widespread transmission.
It's a stark reminder of how circumstances can amplify the impact of these super spreaders.
And Gladwell uses the opioid crisis as another example.
Oh yeah, he talks about how Purdue Pharma, the company behind OxyContin, targeted what they called super spreader doctors.
Doctors who are prescribing opioids at much higher rates than others.
It's pretty disturbing.
It is. To think that this knowledge about super spreaders was used, whether intentionally or not, to fuel the opioid epidemic.
It definitely makes you think about the potential consequences, both positive and negative, of understanding these tipping points.
And it shows that we're not just passive bystanders in all of this.
Yeah.
We can understand these forces and maybe even harness them for good.
The question is, how?
We've covered a lot of ground here. The power of place, the magic third, overstories, super spreaders. It's like we're putting together the pieces of a puzzle.
And seeing this intricate web of influence that shapes our world.
Absolutely. And the exciting part is that by understanding these forces, these tipping points, we can actually become active participants instead of just passive observers.
Right. We're not just along for the ride.
Exactly. So what are some of the biggest things that stand out to you from all this? What are your main takeaways?
You know, it really got me thinking about how these principles are already working in our lives all the time.
In ways we might not even realize.
Right. We're constantly being shaped by our environments, by the groups we're part of, by the stories we hear.
So then how can we actually use this knowledge to our advantage? How can we be proactive?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is. How do we identify those potential tipping points? Those moments when even small actions can create huge ripples.
Well, maybe it starts with simply being more aware, like realizing the power of place could make us more mindful about the environments we choose to be in, the communities we surround ourselves with.
And understanding the magic third might inspire us to seek out or build groups where diverse voices are truly represented and valued.
Makes sense. And when it comes to overstories, maybe we can start looking at those dominant narratives with a more critical eye. actively seek out different perspectives, maybe even contribute to stories that promote positive change.
I like that. What about super spreaders? Any thoughts on how we can use that concept constructively?
Well, if we can identify those individuals or events that have a disproportionate influence, then we might be able to find ways to amplify the good stuff. Spread positive messages, encourage healthy behaviors, or even promote innovative ideas.
It's almost like we've been given this toolkit for understanding and maybe even influencing change.
It is powerful, isn't it?
It is, and maybe a little daunting, but definitely incredibly exciting.
The potential is huge. The real question is, how are we going to use it?
That's the challenge and the opportunity that all of us have to wrestle with. So as we wrap up this deep dive into tipping points, I would encourage everyone listening to take a look around. Think about your own life, your community, and consider how these principles are already at work. What tipping points can you influence? What stories can you help reshape? What positive changes can you be a part of? Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep. Thanks for joining us.